Hello, hello. So I'm making some soup, and I've started off by chopping up an onion. It's the start of many a good meal. So I've chopped my onion, peeled it, cut it in half, and then cut it into three, and now I'm just chopping it into small pieces. So if you cut it nice and fine, it cooks quicker. And I'm just popping it in the saucepan on a medium heat with a little bit of butter and a bit of olive oil. So probably about a teaspoon of butter and a teaspoon of olive oil. The olive oil helps the batter to not burn. And I always get my onion in the pan first before I do anything else, because if you cook your onion, soften your onion and cook it a bit before you add your other vegetables, it gives the soup a much better flavour, I find. It brings out the sweetness of the onion, just to cook it. You don't want it to burn, so it's quite important you don't have the heat on too high. If it starts to get any kind of colour or starts to catch on the bottom, that means you've got it on too high a temperature and you need to turn it down. So I'm going to just turn mine down because mine's it's not catching yet, but I can tell that it's a little bit hot, so I've just turned it down a bit. And you want to sweat the onions, so that means that they're producing their own kind of like liquid, but you don't want them to run out of liquid, so you just cook them slowly for a little while. So I've just popped my onion in. That's two sort of small to medium onions gone in there. And I'm now going to add some salt straight away. My top tip really for soup making or any kind of cooking is to get your seasoning in early, because if you cook your vegetables without any seasoning, then they stay quite tasteless. So even if you add salt after, it hasn't really brought out the flavour of the vegetables. So I'm going to add just a pinch of salt to my onions first of all, and a bit of black pepper as well. Just get that in there quickly. I'm also going to add a little bit of ground coriander in a little while. And again, it's quite important to get any sort of spices and stuff in there to heat them through to release their flavour before you add any liquid. But I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm just going to let the onions sweat down a little bit first. And I'm going to start chopping my veg. So I've already chopped some of it, but I'm just going to chop the rest that needs to go in. So I'm just peeling my carrot. If your carrots the skins look quite nice and they're quite clean, then you don't really need to peel them, to be honest with you. And the same goes for potatoes or any of your vegetables. If the skin looks good, then keep the skin on, because the skin has got a lot of nutrients in it. These weren't brilliant, so I've taken the skin off. So I've just peeled my carrot, and now I'm going to split it directly down the middle, so that I've got two halves, and I'm going to lay each half on its flat side and split it again down the middle so it's in quarters. And now that the flat sides are down, it's nice and steady, and then I can just chop all the way along, chop it into small pieces. With vegetables for soup, depending on whether or not you're going to leave it as a sort of chunky vegetable soup or whether you're going to whiz it up in a blender, I just think it's good to chop it into fairly small pieces because it cooks much quicker, and that helps to retain the nutrients in the vegetables. If you cook things for a long time, it doesn't keep as much of the vitamins and minerals in there as you would want. So if you chop it up small, it cooks quickly and hopefully keeps all the goodness in. So that's a carrot gone in there. I'm also going to do some sweet potato. So I've just got some sweet potato. I'm going to do exactly the same thing, cut it in half, and then each half into half again, so it's in quarters. And then when it's on its flat side, you can just then chop along, chop it all at once. Saves you a lot of time doing it that way. And then just scoop it into my bowl ready. I'm also going to do some pepper. So I've already chopped up a yellow pepper, so I'm just now going to do a red pepper. So I'm just going to chop that into small chunks as well. Take out any seeds, discard them. So I'm just chopping that up into bits as well. again, I try and keep the size of the vegetables around about the same, so that if you do want to keep it as a soup that's not been blended, so like a sort of like a chunky vegetable soup, that the pieces are all quite nice and even. That just makes it look nicer, and also the vegetables then tend to cook at a similar rate. So if you have odd size pieces, you might find they cook unevenly. So you might have some pieces which are cooked and other pieces which are not so well cooked. So I try and keep things roughly the same size, especially if you're cooking root vegetables. So anything like sweet potato, parsnips or carrots, try and keep those chunks, if you're cooking them, you know, multi-vegetable soup, keep those chunks the same size, because they all cook roughly at the same amount. They need roughly the same amount of time to cook. So here we go. I've got my peppers in there, red and yellow. I've got my sweet potato and my carrot in there. And I'm just going to add a potato as well, a normal potato. You don't have to add potatoes. I'll give it a quick stir to make sure it's not catching. It's fine, it's still slotting away. So just keep a check on your onions as you're chopping your veg. If you need to turn the pan down, you can. You can also turn it right down low, which is what I'm going to do, and put a lid on, and that keeps all the moisture in. But do make sure, if you do that, that your heat is right down low, because it can very easily burn if you put a lid on it. It's right down low. So there we go, that's now on low. So I've just got a peeled potato, but again, if it's a nice clean potato with a good skin on it, which is nice and clean, then you could just leave the skin on, because again, there's lots of fibre in the skin. So you can do that. So I'm just chopping up my potato into chunks. Potato is one of the vegetables which needs the longest time to cook. So you might want to consider chopping that slightly finer. I mean, it just depends. Some potatoes cook slightly quicker than others, but I'm just doing mine the same size as my carrots and my sweet potato, and that'll be absolutely fine. So just putting a little bit of potato. Now, potato doesn't have much of its own flavour, so unless I'm doing something like a leek and potato soup, I like to put a bit of potato in to give it a nice smooth texture if I'm blending it up. Or just as it is a nice vegetable because it absorbs flavour from the other vegetables, but I wouldn't tend to just do a potato and onion soup. That wouldn't be that flavourful. So it's nice with other things like leeks and other vegetables, but I tend to just put a smaller amount in than the other vegetables because it has less flavour of its own. So now my onions have sweated down. They look pretty good. They start to go slightly translucent, so slightly clear. I don't know that you can see, probably you can't see that, but they start to just take on a slightly different colour. Like they go sort of like clear, starting to go a bit clear, and that's how you know they're sort of pretty much ready to add the other vegetables. So I'm now going to add my ground coriander. So just before I'm adding my other vegetables, I want to add my spices to bring out the flavour. So I'm just going to add probably about a teaspoon to my onions, and I'm just going to give a good stir just to coat the onions in all of that nice ground coriander. And you should be able to smell the spice, the oils in the spice starting to release their flavour as it heats through. So I'm just going to turn my heat up slightly just to bring out that flavour. Usually what I do is I taste a little bit now just to check the seasoning, just to see whether there's enough salt in the onions. So I'm just going to test it. Not salty enough for me. I like a bit more salt, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit more salt. Top tip with all cooking is check your seasoning regularly. Every time you add something, I would check your seasoning just by tasting back of your spoon. Don't worry about germs. You're going to be heating this to over, past boiling point, so it's going to kill any germs. So don't worry about that. All chefs taste their food. It's got to be done. So that's in. That's going to heat for a couple of minutes, and then once it's giving off that nice scent, which it is doing now, I'm going to add my root vegetables first because they take the longest to cook. So I'm just going to add them in. I've also chopped up some garlic, and I'm adding that in now as well. Not everybody likes garlic, but I love it, and it's so good for you. Garlic is really good, especially as we're heading into winter. at warding off coughs and colds. And so are root vegetables, actually. They're full of goodness. So I really recommend making soups with plenty of root vegetables and garlic and onions as we head towards autumn and winter. So they're all in there now, and I'm now just going to stir the onions around with the spice and stir it around with my vegetables. I'm also going to add a little bit of turmeric too. I should have added that when I added the coriander. Turmeric is like, it's a root. It's a bit like ginger, but you buy it. You can buy it as a root, and if you can, amazing, because it's like fresh turmeric is so good for you. But this is dried and ground turmeric, and it's a real sort of staple in Indian cooking. I'm just going to add about a teaspoon of that in. It doesn't have a particularly strong flavour. It's a little bit sort of bitter, but it's got this amazing colour, and it's so amazingly health giving. Like, it's got lots of properties, like scientifically proven now. So it's anti-inflammatory, so it's really good for things like arthritis. It's really good for things for cancer. It's like got anti-cancer properties to it, so preventative. Cancer, it's used all the time in Indian cooking, and I can understand why, because although it hasn't got this a powerful flavour, it's so good for you. You can sort of see why they use it in pretty much everything. So yeah, loads of stuff online about how good for you turmeric is, and I really recommend reading up about it, because it's something that I try and add it to my cooking where it's appropriate. So soups and curries and, you know, stir fries, I just whack a bit of turmeric in there. So you can buy it as a supplement actually in the health food shop if you want to just take it with that. If you don't like the flavour of it, or you know, doesn't really go with your style of cooking, then you can take it as a supplement instead in a tablet, a capsule, so you don't have to taste it. So there we go, it's all in. All the root vegetables are in. I've turned up the heat now so that that just starts to fry a little bit, because if you fry your vegetables a bit with the onions and the garlic and the spices, it will help the vegetables to really absorb the flavours. So that's another top tip, is make sure you get and fry them a little bit. I'm just going to add a bit more black pepper and a pinch more salt, because I've just added. So every time you add something, you chances are you're going to need to add seasoning. So I'm just going to add a little bit, because my stock that I like to use, I use this vegetable one, which is called Marigold Vegetable Bouillon. And I really like these organic callow stock cubes as well. Both got really nice flavour. So if you're vegetarian, I would go for that. That's the best vegetable stock that I know of. The callow one is not bad either, the vegetable one, but that one's got a really nice flavour. And if you're not worried about being vegetarian, then that's the best stock cubes that I've found. The organic callow ones, both of them, you just get them in any old supermarket. So just gonna, those vegetables are now sweating down a little bit, and I'm just now going to add the peppers. So I've got red and yellow peppers. I'm going to add them in as well. So a really lovely big full pan full of vegetables there. Just going to give the vegetables another minute to sweat down. I'm going to pop the lid on. Give it a taste. Yep. Salty enough for me. I have got quite a salty taste, so I really like salt. And I probably add you know, more than the average person. But I think if you add it in at the right time, then it really brings out the flavour of your food. But just keep testing, because only you really know. There's no point in me saying, oh, add a teaspoon or add half a teaspoon, because only you know your taste. So if you like things salty, then add as much as you like the taste of it. And equally, if you don't like much, then don't add much. Oh, I forgot. I'm also going to add a bay leaf. It's just from my garden. It doesn't really matter if you haven't got one, but for soup and stew, I really think a bay leaf adds a nice flavour. So I'm just going to pop that in there. You don't chop it up or anything, you leave it whole, because you're going to take it out at the end when you finish cooking. Or if you just like a little bit of the bay leaf flavour, but it's you're not too sure, you can take it out at any part in the cooking. So once you've got a bit of the flavour, you could just take it out, or if you really like the flavour of it, leave it into the end. So that's all doing really well. So now we're ready to add some liquid. The soup, all the vegetables have had a little bit of time to sweat down with the onions and the garlic and the spices. So stir. So I'll just pop the lid back on while I get my water ready. So I've got a kettle full of water here. It's already hot, so I'm just going to bring it back to the boil. Because it's you can add cold water, but I think it's, to save on energy, it actually helps to add boiling water because then it comes to the boil much quicker. And I think it also helps to preserve the nutrients a little bit as well if you just pour boiling water straight on. I'm just going to put my spices away while kettle's boiling. Bit of tidy as you go. I'm not particularly known for it, I must say. I do make a bit of a mess usually, but as I'm on camera today, I'll tidy up as I go along. I'm just going to get rid of my peelings as well. I keep all my peelings and I put them in the compost heap for my allotment, so I'll just get rid of them. There's my kettle. So now I'm going to add my boiling water to my vegetables. And you just basically want enough to cover the veg. So don't go crazy, don't add too much liquid, because you can always add more liquid, but you can't take it out without taking the flavour out. So just enough to cover the veg. Give it a good stir, especially if anything's kind of slightly sticking at the bottom. The water should release that. So give it a good old stir. And now I'm going to do a bit of both in this one. I'm going to add one chicken stock cube. Because the water's nice and hot, it should just dissolve in. So you just crumble it in. And then I'm going to also add about a teaspoon of the vegetable stock as well. This is quite salty, this vegetable stock. So just be aware of that when you're seasoning. If you do get some of this, and all stock cubes actually are usually quite salty, so just be aware that you're adding quite a lot of salt. So before you put your next lot of salt in or add any more salt, just check before you do that once you've added this. So it's about a heaped teaspoon. I'm going to give it a good stir, and once it's all mixed in, I'm going to then test the seasoning to see how salty it is and how tasty it is before I put the lid on. So I've given it a good mix. I'm just going to get a little bit of the liquid. That is good. That is tasty. And it's not too salty, it's just right. It's just right for my palate. So now the lid, I've turned it up to the highest setting because I want it to come to the boil. I'm going to pop the lid on so that obviously the lid keeps the heat in and helps it come to the boil quicker. And once it's come to the boil, I will then turn it down so that it's simmering. It's going to hopefully come to the boil quite quickly, and then I can show you just that you just turn it down, pop the lid on, and that's it. You just leave it then to cook for probably sort of 15-20 minutes. I don't really time it as such. I just tend to sort of hang around. I'm usually getting other bits of the meal ready. Might be getting my bread out or toast or making toast or whatever. So I just tend to check the vegetables probably sort of after about 10 minutes. I check them, and if they're cooked through, then that's ready. If it might take longer, it might take up to 20 minutes. Just depends on what vegetables you're cooking. Obviously the root vegetables take a bit longer to cook, so could be up to half an hour. Particularly at this stage, if you wanted to give your soup a bit more like a few more nutrients, make it a bit of added value nutritionally, you could add some lentils. or some chickpeas, or if you're using dried lentils, you'd put them in now, but then you would need to cook it for about half an hour for them to be cooked through, which is fine. I'm not going to do that today because I'm making this for Mark and Joe, so I don't know whether Mark and Joe like lentils or chickpeas, so I'm not going to do that today. But if I was making this just for me, I probably would add a few red lentils or a can of chickpeas, just to give it a bit more body. So that's now coming up to a boil. So I'm now going to just turn it down and just leave it to simmer. Obviously it's going to be a bit like watching paint dry for you guys if I just keep the camera running while it's cooking, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let you know that once it's cooked, so once your vegetables are cooked, you would then turn the heat off, take your pan off the heat, and then if you want to keep it as a chunky soup, perfect. That would be the time that I would add my sort of like softer herbs, so like fresh herbs. So I've got some coriander here, I don't know if you can see that, but I've got some fresh coriander, and I would add that at the last, like once it's cooked, because it doesn't actually need to cook through the coriander, it just adds a nice flavour at the end. You can add some sooner if you want to. It's entirely your choice. I prefer the taste of it when it's like really fresh. You could also add some chili flakes if you like things a bit spicy. I would tend to add them myself at the end because I don't like a really, really hot flavour, and if you cook chili in a soup or in a stew, it tends to build the longer you cook it. So I would just put a few chili flakes in at the end if I felt like having something a bit spicy. So once the vegetables are cooked, you can then leave it as a chunky soup, add your herbs, and then it's done. You can dish it up, or you can use a stick blender, which I'm just going to fetch. So my stick blender is like my best bit of kitchen equipment that I've ever invested in, and it wasn't very expensive. It was probably about 15 quid, I reckon. Anyway, I would use this to plug it in, and once the soup is off the heat, don't do it while it's still cooking because it can splash up and hurt you. So once it's off the heat, I would then give it a good old blend up with my stick blender, and then I would add my coriander on the top of that just to make it look nice and to add the flavour. So yeah, this is going to be a very tasty soup, I hope. And Mark and Joe, you're going to get to experience it later on. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed learning my top tips for soup making. So I just realised you can pause and then keep recording. I didn't realise that, so I said goodbye a bit prematurely. So I'm back because the soup is now cooked. So I thought I would just show you that it's cooked, and I'm gonna take out my bay leaf because I'm done with that now. And I've added a little bit of coriander in on the top, and I shall add a little bit more now, just to, that's that nice fresh flavour that I was talking about. It's nice to have it nice and fresh. I'm just taking the leaves off and getting rid of the stalks. Just plop a little bit in, and then I'm gonna I've decided that I'm going to do kind of like a half and half. So I'm going to blend half of it, and I'm going to keep some of the chunky vegetables as well. So I'm just going to, with my spoon, I'm just going to spoon out some of the veg to keep whole, and then I'm going to blend up the rest. So I'm just going to take out a few spoonfuls of veg, and I'm now going to use my stick blender to blend it up. So I'm just going to take it off the heat so that it doesn't hopefully spit all over me, soup all over me. Just give it a whiz. So it doesn't take long, just about a minute. There we go. It's looking good. It's nice and thick, and it's not too thick. So I'm all done with the stick blender. Just turn that in there. Turn it off. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's a really nice thick soup. And I'm just going to add in my vegetables back in again, the ones that I've reserved, just to give it a bit of extra texture. I'm going to stir them in, so then it's kind of a combination of nice thick soup, but with a few chunks in as well. Yeah, I'm just going to try it, make sure it tastes good. Pretty sure it will, because I've been testing it all the way along, and that's the key to good cooking, is to test all the way along. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be fine. But you will find once you blend the vegetables up, it kind of releases a bit more of the flavour as well. So it's good. But I forgot to say earlier that with the vegetables that I chose, so I chose carrots, sweet potato, peppers, and potato, obviously with the onion and garlic as a base. But pretty much any vegetables at all you can make into soup. I just chose those because then they're all nice, sort of similar colours. That's the thing I would recommend, is that you choose vegetables that are sort of have similar colours. Obviously potato doesn't have much of a colour, so you can use that as a base for anything. But if you mix green vegetables and orange or red vegetables together, you will get a really unpleasant shade of brown. So I don't recommend that. So even if they might taste good together, it will look very unappetizing. But if you choose things that are similar colours, so reds, oranges, yellows, plus white potatoes, you'll get a nice orange, vibrant looking soup. And equally, if you want to make more of a green soup, so we make a soup with, so we'd use potatoes, leeks, spinach, broccoli, courgette, peas, and parsnip, things like that. They would all go really well together, but make a nice vibrant green sort of soup, which is again visually nice to look at, as opposed to a brown mess, which is what you'll get if you mix the two. So that's just the last little tip for you. So yeah, it's all ready to go. I'm now going to portion it up for Joe and Mark. So these tubs are really handy, I find, for portioning things up. They're just sort of like takeaway tubs, but they go really well in the freezer, and you can stand them on top of each other in the freezer. So I'm going to portion up some soup so that Joe and Mark can put a couple of portions in their freezer if they want to, or they can eat it straight away. So it's all good to go. You can put it in there hot because they are heat proof. So I'm just going to pour, well, you can't see, hang on, I'll put the board instead. So I'm just going to pour my soup into the containers. And one of these containers, if you fill it to the brim, should do 2 small portions, or 2 sort of average sized portions, or 1 really big portion if you're very, very hungry. So there we go. It's portioned up. Pop the lids on. Just remember, when you're freezing soup, don't put it in the freezer until the soup is cooled down, because otherwise you'll defrost your freezer, which is not great. So yeah, just wait for it to cool, put the lids on, and leave a little bit of a gap at the top, because when you freeze something it will expand, so you don't want the lids to pop off. So just leave like ½ centimetre at the top, just so it's got room to expand. All right, that's it. Soup is all done, and I'm just going to have a portion myself with a bagel. So looking forward to that. Anyway, take care. Bye.